The Ottoman Empire is one of the most fascinating empires in human history. At its height, it owned territory across 3 different continents, stretching at its peak from the hills of Hungary to the Nile Valley in Egypt to the shores of Yemen in the Indian Ocean, and comprised numerous different ethnicities, peoples, and religions, all of whom were tolerated and very often loyal to the empire, even though it was ruled by a Turkish-speaking Muslim aristocracy. However, despite these facts, the Ottoman Empire seems to be severely misunderstood by many Europeans. It has been argued that the terms Turk and Turkey seem to have negative connotations for most Europeans. This might stem from a medieval European fear, from when the Ottoman Empire governed large parts of European territory and seemed to threaten the very existence of Christianity itself. For example, during the Middle Ages, Bishop Fabri of Vienna claimed that, quote, "There are no crueler and more audacious villains under the heavens than the Turks." Such sentiments can even be found today. Like, for example, when Frits Bolkestein, a previous Dutch politician and member of the European Commission, warned that if the modern-day country of Turkey should be given a negotiation date to join the European Union, then the victory over the Turks at the gates of Vienna in 1683 would, quote, "have been in vain." Today, we live in a world where the traditional party structures of Europe are seemingly turning on their heads, with far-right nationalist parties on the rise all over the continents, from the AFD in Germany to the National Rally in France. Even in my own country, Norway, the right-wing Progress Party is making huge margins in the opinion polls and is likely to dominate the national election next year. In these tense times, where nationalism is on the rise, I thought it would be beneficial to investigate one of these sources of European misunderstanding of the Ottoman Empire, that being the fascinating institutions of the Devshirme system and the Janissary Corps. These Ottoman institutions specifically seem to be very perplexing to many Westerners and is often described using terms like slave soldiers who were in fact, at least according to one article, kidnapped from their Christian parents. So Turks practiced forms of slave soldiery and kidnapping of Christians? Well, as usual regarding controversial historical topics, it is a bit more complex than that. I find it extremely annoying whenever people oversimplify history. So, let us together investigate this topic a bit deeper. My intention here is not to give any kind of moral judgment on the topic, or to discuss whether or not these aspects of Ottoman society are even legal according to Islamic law. My intention is merely to provide people with some beneficial historical perspectives on this topic, and then let people decide for themselves how they want to judge it. And in order to be as fair and objective as I can, I will try to primarily use non-Muslim Western sources on these topics. So, with all of that being said, let us therefore investigate these questions. What exactly were the Turkish Janissaries? What was the Devshirme system? And, by implication, did Muslim Turks kidnap Christian children? First of all, let's start with the basics. What were the Janissaries? So, the Janissaries were essentially the elite core of the Ottoman military. Known for their discipline and military prowess, they constituted, in fact, the first modern standing army in all of Europe. They fought in many significant battles that were instrumental to the Ottoman Empire's rise. For example, during the Ottoman siege and eventual conquest of the city of Constantinople in 1453, The Ottoman army, which made up about 100 to 150,000 soldiers, had a core of about 6,000 Janissaries. These Janissaries were not low-level oppressed people groups within the empire. Quite the contrary. The Janissaries were actually a part of the highest levels of Ottoman society. The Janissaries were not just elite soldiers. They were richly dressed, attended special schools, and held high positions within the Ottoman state. Many were trained to become generals, governors, and administrators. Some even rose to become grand viziers of the empire. That is the highest political office after the Sultan himself, as the Janissary system allowed them to rise within the empire as high as their talents and aspirations might lead them, to use a phrase from two historians. However, as I have noted earlier, the Janissary core might seem rather perplexing amongst certain Western observers because of the special system used to draft members into its army. That leads me to my second question, which has to do with the so-called Devshirme system. Devshirme, a word that means gathering, was the system used to recruit new Janissaries. Essentially, it was a system of tribute, where primarily Christian youth would be taken by Ottoman officials, converted to Islam, learned Turkish, and trained for positions within the Ottoman government and army. These youth came predominantly from the Christian peoples who were supposed to provide a certain percentage of male youth, typically between the ages of 14 to 17, to Ottoman officials. These boys would then be trained for positions within the Ottoman army and administration. Now, this is where a lot of the potential controversy might come in. Many might immediately describe this as a kind of child abduction or something like that, interpreting it as a forced acquisition of Christian children turned into the hands of an evil Muslim empire, especially since Muslims were exempted from the Devshirme and did not have to take part in it. For example, the historian Thomas Walker Arnold writes that European Christians have expressed what he describes as their horrors over the Devshirme system, and that Christian travelers in the Ottoman Empire have given touching depictions of desolate homes and parents weeping for the children torn away from their arms by Ottoman authorities. So yes, that is an image that does appear, at least in one of my sources. However, is it the only image? As I noted earlier, it is very annoying to me whenever history is oversimplified, especially when history is abused by certain people in order to fit a particular nationalistic agenda. Certain Europeans could easily take advantage of the Devshirme system and its history in an attempt to advance the old stereotypical myth of the terrible Turk, the evil Muslim, the violent and oppressive Islamic religion, and how it is so different and inhumane compared to our civilized Western humanitarian European Christian culture. Yet, as with so many other topics relating to Islamic history, one needs to be really careful of not oversimplifying this topic, especially when it is done just to advance an unhistorical nationalistic agenda. To illustrate my point, let me share some perspectives from the historian Philip Dayleader, an historian who earned a PhD from Harvard University. Again, he's not a Muslim, he's not Turkish, but he mentions some rather surprising facts regarding the Devshirme and the Janissary system that I would like to share. So, Philip Dayleader, he notes, for example, that the Devshirme system, at least as he describes it, benefited Christians within the Ottoman Empire, as it gave local Christians a stake in the Ottoman success. He says, as I mentioned earlier, that these Christian youth would be taken by Ottoman officials to be trained for military and administrative service within the empire. And, as he says himself, these roles were important. While most of these youth would be put into the elite Janissary corps of the Ottoman army, becoming the Ottomans' most effective fighting force, some of these former Christians were given high positions within Ottoman administration. The Devshirme, therefore, to use his description, provided an important avenue of advancement for Christian families. Their leader even says that Muslim families tried to sneak their own children into the Janissary corps, by implication because they saw it probably to be of great benefit to them. Their leader also notes a very interesting example of this. So, when the Christian Bosnians converted to Islam as a group in the 15th century, the Bosnians actually stipulated that although they were Muslim, they should still remain eligible for the Devshirme after conversion, as before when they had been Christians. These former Christian Bosnians actually wanted to be a part of the Devshirme system, even though they had converted to Islam and therefore did not have to take part in it. Does this sound like an oppressed people suffering under forced Muslim abduction of their children? This phenomenon is also noted by historians Lawrence Davidson and Arthur Goldsmith Jr., who writes that although some parents resisted this apparent thievery of their children, others actually brought them willingly to the Ottoman recruiters. Another historian by the name of Kenneth W. Harl, who took a PhD at Yale University, had even more fascinating things to say. He says, as I mentioned earlier, that these former Christians often held high positions within the Ottoman state, and that a good deal of the state apparatus was in fact run by these Janissaries. He says that around 10% of the Janissaries would be sent to the palace to become top administrators, governors, and generals for the empire. But that's not all. Janissaries were also trained to become top architects and engineers. One of the examples he brings up here is the famous Turkish architect Sinan. Now, Sinan, I don't know exactly how you pronounce his name, but just bear with me. Sinan is, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating characters in all of Ottoman history. He was the chief royal architect of the Ottoman Empire from 1539 to 1588, working under famous sultans like the one and only Süleyman the Magnificent. This celebrated Ottoman architect had his ideas serve as the basic themes for virtually all later Turkish civic and religious architecture. Being the architect of several hundred monuments, he ended up pushing the boundaries of geometric structure, space, and light, even influencing aspects of Italian Renaissance architecture and inspiring the Swiss architect Le Corbusier. He also transformed the landscape of Constantinople and helped supervise the buttressing of the famous Hagia Sophia, the former church built under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. Sinan is in fact so monumental that he has been called the Turkish Michelangelo. Now, why on earth am I mentioning him in this discussion? Well, because Sinan was a part of the Devshirme system and the Janissary Corps. Sinan was not ethnically Turkish. His original name was actually Joseph and was born as a Christian of either Greek or Armenian parents. Later, he was drafted into the Janissary Corps, converted to Islam, and trained in the Army Corps of Engineers, building bridges and roads. He then went on to construct the great Ottoman mosques under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent and Selim II, becoming, as I mentioned before, the chief architect of the empire itself. Again, does this man seem like an oppressed and abused youth, kidnapped from his parents and forced to do the bidding of an evil Islamic state? I would say quite the opposite. Sinan is rather a proof for how the Devshirme system gave great career opportunities to different ethnicities under Ottoman rule. Kenneth W. Harl calls him, in fact, a typical product of the Devshirme system. However, it does not end there. Kenneth Harl gives even more examples, noting that some Janissaries could even rise to literally become the Grand Viziers of the empire. In other words, these former Christians could rise through the ranks to achieve the highest political positions in the Ottoman Empire after the Sultan himself. Perhaps the most famous example being Sokulu Mehmed Pasha, the Grand Vizier under Suleiman I and Selim II, and the man who led the Ottomans during the conquest of Cyprus from the Venetians. Sokulu Mehmed Pasha was, again, a product of the Devshirme system. He was not ethnically Turkish. In fact, he was from a Serbian family. He was originally from a Christian family, spoke a Slavic language, was drafted into the Devshirme, converted to Islam, rose through the ranks to eventually achieve the position of Grand Vizier, and even married the daughter of the Sultan himself. Again, does this man seem like an oppressed and abused youth kidnapped from his parents and forced to do the bidding of an evil Islamic state? No. Things are a bit more complex than that. Sokulu Mehmed Pasha was in fact one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the Ottoman Empire at the time. I find his example especially fascinating as it really helps to deconstruct many of these nationalistic narratives that you find in certain Balkan countries today. Certain Slavic people, especially certain Serbian individuals, might try to construct a kind of narrative of their past under the Ottomans as an oppressive episode in their history, perhaps even depicting the Ottomans as an evil foreign occupier and all of the other oversimplifications associated with nationalism. But as the example of Mehmed Pasha shows, this kind of narrative is very ignorant. I mean, this so-called evil and un-European empire that oppressed the Serbian people was literally run and administered by ethnic Slavic Europeans of Serbian descent. Ethnic Slavic Europeans who, well, had a lot of power and could use their influence to benefit their families. Sokulu Mehmed Pasha even appointed his brother to become the Orthodox Patriarch of the Balkans, and his own cousin later became Grand Vizier himself. There is so much that one could talk about here, but I think I have to draw this discussion to a close. However, to conclude, let us look at one last historian who also discusses the Janissary system. That historian is Thomas Walker Arnold, a former professor of Arabic and Islamic studies at the University of London who died in 1930. In his book, The Preaching of Islam, A History of the Propagation of the Muslim Faith, he gives some fascinating perspectives on the Devshirme system that I would like to share with you. The things Thomas Walker Arnold writes about the Ottoman Empire might surprise many who are used to the traditional simplistic image of the terrible Turk and the violent, oppressive religion of Islam. Now, just to give some context, Arnold has just been discussing the treatment of the Greeks under the Ottoman Empire and have noted the great toleration that Greeks enjoyed in the Ottoman state. Then he starts discussing the Devshirme and the Janissary system. And as I noted earlier, Thomas Arnold describes this image which you can find among certain European observers. So let's read it, shall we? Arnold writes, Christian Europe has always expressed its horror at such a barbarous tax, and travelers in the Turkish dominions have painted touching pictures of desolate homes and of parents weeping for the children torn from their arms. Yes, as I noted earlier, you can indeed find this image. However, according to Thomas Arnold, it is not the only image. Quote, but when the corps was first instituted, its numbers were rapidly swelled by voluntary accessions from among the Christians themselves. Wait, Christians volunteered for the Janissary Corps? Well, apparently yes. As has been pointed out earlier by other historians, many wanted willingly to become part of this system. Arnold writes further, and the circumstances under which this tribute was first imposed may go far to explain the apathy which the Greeks themselves appear to have exhibited. The whole country had been laid waste by war, and families were often in danger of perishing with hunger. The children who were thus adopted were in many cases orphans who would otherwise have been left to perish. The point on Christian orphans is interesting. Perhaps one could claim that the Devshirme system gave these orphans social security and safety. Arnold also writes that, quote, this custom, meaning the Janissary system, this custom has, moreover, been maintained to have been only a continuation of a similar usage that was in force under the Byzantine emperors. Wait, the Greek Byzantine emperors invented the Devshirme system? I am not an expert historian. I will not comment on whether this is true or not, but yes, apparently people have argued that this Ottoman tribute system is to some extent a continuation of an earlier Greek Byzantine practice. Arnold continues, it has even been said that there was seldom any necessity of an appeal to force on the part of the officers who collected the appointed number of children, but rather that the parents were often eager to have their children enrolled in a service that secured for them in many cases a brilliant career and under any circumstances a well cared for and comfortable existence, since these little captives were brought up and educated as if they were the Sultan's own children. Again, Arnold actually claims that many Christian parents were eager to enroll their children in this service, and that the Ottoman Empire rarely had to resort to force, given that these Christian children would be guaranteed a comfortable existence and a good career. Arnold writes further, this institution appears in a less barbarous light if it is true that the parents could often redeem their children by a money payment. So, yeah. Was this system really that big of a deal? Arnold continues, these accentuating circumstances at the outset and the ease with which men acquiescence in any established usage, though serving in no way as an excuse for so inhuman an institution, may help us to understand the readiness with which the Greeks seem to have fallen in with this demand of the new government that so materially improved their condition. End quote. Wow. Now, that was a mouthful of unexpected historical reflections. And let me emphasize this. I don't necessarily see Thomas Walker Arnold as some kind of Muslim apologist. He does not mind saying his opinion, calling the Devshirme system an inhuman practice, etc. Still, he actually portrays the Devshirme system in a rather positive light, all things considered. He notes that Christians themselves wanted to be Janissaries, volunteering for the system, and being eager to enroll their own children in the service. I mean, his claim that Ottoman authorities rarely had to use force is remarkable in itself. Again, it is not my intention to morally judge the Devshirme system or to say that it is valid according to Islamic law, or that's a completely different discussion altogether. However, what I'm trying to say here is that should we perhaps be a little bit careful before judging the system? Are things perhaps a bit more complex than our simple-minded nationalistic narratives would have it to be? I am not trying to give an answer here. I am not saying whether or not I support the Devshirme system or if I think it's morally justified. That's not my point. My intention is simply to give the perspectives, ask the questions, and let the viewers decide for themselves. So, to answer the question that I asked at the beginning, did Muslim Turks kidnap Christians? Well, I will not answer this question. I will let the viewers decide for themselves. However, whatever personally that you might think of the Devshirme system, whether you agree with it, disagree with it, whether you think it was morally okay, morally justified, or moral evil, whatever you might believe, at least make sure that your opinion is based on proper knowledge, that you have evaluated the evidences and different perspectives on the issue before you make your judgment. And this is very important. At least make sure that your intention is genuinely based on a pure willingness to find truth and is not simply based in egotistical, morally degenerate nationalism that seeks to denigrate entire people groups in a desperate attempt at legitimizing yourself. In other words, if you want to criticize the Ottoman Devshirme system, make sure that this criticism is based on a pure intention and that you don't simply do it in order to denigrate Turkish people, Muslims, or their history in general. Anyway, I hope that this discussion has been beneficial for you. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.